online was easier, or a way a lot of people on the spectrum communicated with each other. Maybe it would be interesting to kind of figure out exactly why, or if this is a case of people thinking that they are telling the truth or being honest and not realizing their own behaviors, and it not being as 50-50. It'd be interesting to kind of figure that piece out, especially since a lot of communication in general has gone online, and it'd be interesting to figure out um, why there's such a big in-person aspect to to it. Another theme that was felt throughout the interviews was the theme of kind of minimizing your own autism, or like questioning how autistic you were, or even kind of just othering. Like the way that people related to their autism as um, kind of as not as bad, might just reflect the attitude of functioning labels and how they affect people's perceptions of themselves, and and a lot of it was that they didn't feel like they were as severe as other people, which might be a result of being labeled high functioning, or having in certain cases having like relatives or knowing people who either fit that definition of autism more, or are called autistic more, and that might be a reason for those feelings. It also might be an awareness thing, and there was a lot of questions that people also did not fully answer or have thought about, especially in regards to autism. So, in that regard, that might be connected to the denialing or othering of person's autism, or in how they see themselves, or also questioning whether or not they were autistic. Through the interviews, there were some people who felt very strongly about their autism, but they felt about their autism. It also could be connected to the misunderstanding a lot of people had about their own diagnosis. A lot of some people were said that they were too malign. Other people kind of felt that it felt like they weren't fully like diagnosed, or did not understand their diagnosis despite receiving services for autism, and or going to a school for people on the spectrum, and still didn't really know whether or not they were diagnosed. Also, there was a lot of self-diagnosing, and part of that identity, and how that affected their role in the identity, and it didn't really seem to have much of an effect of people's involvement. Some of the people who self-identified were could be related um, to those themes overall. Another thing, um, another thing that was interesting in the themes was viewing autism as somehow more authentic. A lot of people did not note differences, and the people who did said that the difference was more honesty in interaction, more authenticity, more like enthusiasm, and just more varied interactions, and more. And this is probably because of less performance-based interactions, and more authentic, or more um, straight up just being oneself in front of another person, and not and doing it partly because of not understanding or having a hard time with social cues and facial expressions. And so when you that is kind of stripped away, a lot of deeper communication can take place, because there's not putting up this front of politeness, but also at the same time not necessarily being rude or mean, and not being like malicious, but just not being polite performatively. And another thing that is related to this is that a lot of people found community in other places besides their autism, and that might be because a lot of the people who I did interview were college students and did have, I think, opportunity to make community outside of their autism, or also special interests played a huge role, which is not surprising because special interests are hobbies in general are a way people make connections, but people on the spectrum tend to be very interested in things and want to pursue their passions. And so that did not surprise that was a big way people made community, was through their special interests. And also that a lot of people made other parts of their identity also a way that they seek community. The final theme of the fact that autism community exists outside of what people think it does, regardless of people's connection to it, proves that in some ways that there is an autism community, but it doesn't exist every time two autistic people are put into a room. And it'd be interesting to see in what conditions autism community forms, and it'd be interesting to kind of go back and look at this. Another thing that would be interesting would be to look into different special interests and see the connection there of community building with people on the spectrum. It would also be interesting to see if these themes changed if I interviewed people younger or a little bit older, who may have different social conditioning for their autism. It'd also be interesting to kind of see a change over time, and to keep interviewing people and see if they develop a consciousness about it. Some people did say that they believed in neurodiversity, especially when after it was explained to them. A couple people did not believe or did not really fully understand the concept of neurodiversity, but did view their autism as somewhat positive, or if they felt it was negative because of the social isolation that they felt autism caused them, and not necessarily autism itself, but the reaction from other people. So if I were going to continue on and do more research, I would definitely try and go to like an autism group and see if they had different views on neurodiversity and autism, and had more of an awareness. I think my method of getting a bunch of college students or recent grads who were mostly in their 20s might be why the sample is so like individualistic. But if I were to interview like a group who maybe shared some of the same ideals, it'd be an interesting thing, and then compare it to more people. I think it also this shows that shows the individuality of everyone on the spectrum, but also shows that there is some similarities in how people think or perceive their autism, and I was surprised by a lot of the results, and also in a lot of how people did not think that a lot of people did not feel that there was a change in interaction, or did hung around people who were not autistic at a similar rate than people who were autistic, though there were a lot of exceptions who felt the other way, or a couple exceptions that felt like they hung out with more autistic people than non-autistic people. But it would be interesting to also again, to follow this up and to kind of see if that is a perception or if that is kind of the reality of actually seeing who people's friends are, and if they do have as 50-50, or maybe even hang out with neurotypical people more, the people who said that they were or that they hung out with autistic people more. It'd be interesting to see if the what people are reporting is what actually is happening, and how much self-awareness plays a role in these interviews. Because despite not questioning whether or not people were lying to me through the interview, there were times when I questioned whether or not people were not fully like realizing their own experience, or kind of unaware of things. So despite the fact that I never felt like people were trying to be polite or trying to hide things out of shame, I did feel a lot of just not self-awareness in these interviews, and kind of just not really being that terribly reflective in some instances. So that would be interesting to kind of see if there's just like a bias gap on some of the things that are more quantitatable, to see if there was a level of awareness there. I think every human, it's hard to fully understand what we do in our behaviors, so it'd be interesting to kind of figure that out. So if I were to continue this project, I would definitely interview people, or maybe go back after time and ask them. It was also interesting to see which charities or organizations, and despite nobody put an organization that they really liked, everyone had an organization that they didn't like, which was Autism Speaks, and that kind of is a higher reflective of the autism like political climate. But the interesting thing is, a lot of the people who I interviewed did not have that strong stances about neurodiversity. While supporting it, mostly they weren't very active in securing it. There were some people who were very active in securing it and very active in trying to make it come about, but there were a lot of people who weren't as activists, or did not like consider it as important.